All right, welcome to this explainer. Look, if you've ever stared at a massive stack of academic papers and felt totally paralyzed, just wondering how you're possibly supposed to find something new to say, you are in exactly the right place. Trust me, we've all been there, just drowning in PDFs and struggling to find our own voice. But today, we're decoding the mechanics of source synthesis to fix that exact problem. We're going to completely transform how you approach your literature reviews.
Okay, let's dive right in and address the most common trap researchers fall into. I want you to ask yourself, are you just stacking books, or are you actually building an argument? Acting like a librarian instead of an architect is a really subtle trap, but honestly, it completely changes the trajectory of your research. We have to move from just piling up information to actually constructing something meaningful out of it.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, beyond the simple summary. Second, librarian versus the architect. Third, building your synthesis matrix. Fourth, embracing contradictory findings. Fifth, the they say, I say. And finally, automating your research tools. Let's start with section 1, beyond the simple summary. And we have to kick things off by completely changing our mindset about what a literature review actually is. It is absolutely not just a descriptive list of what's already been published. If you're just writing, this person said this and then that person said that, you're kind of missing the entire point of the exercise. Let's really break down this mindset shift, the librarian versus the architect. So a librarian simply catalogs who said what, right? Smith found this in 2020, Jones argued that in 2021. It's perfectly organized, sure, but it only tells the reader what was said. It doesn't tell them why it matters. An architect, on the other hand, does something entirely different. An architect takes those raw materials, the data, the arguments, the theories, and actively connects those findings to construct a completely new perspective. You're building a persuasive argument. You aren't just stacking books on a shelf. You're deliberately comparing them to reveal a logical tension. Moving on to section 2, building your synthesis matrix. To stop thinking about individual articles and actually start thinking in overarching themes, we need a reliable way to visually map the entire scholarly landscape. Because let's be real, you can't build an architecture if you can't see all your materials at once. And that brings us to the synthesis matrix, which brilliantly illustrates how to shift your focus to get that much-needed bird's eye view. Notice how a matrix like this is organized. Down the left side, you've got the author's names, but across the top, we have the major themes identified across multiple readings, things like multiple roles or classroom environment. As you populate those cells with your notes, you're no longer trapped inside a single article. You're taking a comprehensive look at the literature as a whole. And when you map your sources out in a table format like this, something truly magical happens. You can immediately see where the conversation is loud and crowded, where everyone agrees and the research is totally saturated. But much more importantly, you can see where it is completely silent. Look at those blank cells. Those empty spaces where scholars just haven't connected a specific methodology to a specific theme. Those are incredible opportunities. Finding a gap is basically the holy grail of research, and those empty cells are your potential research gaps, literally just waiting to be explored. Section 3, embracing contradictory findings. So what happens when your matrix reveals that scholars completely disagree with one another? When one cell emphatically says up and the other insists down? Well, you absolutely shouldn't hide from contradictory findings. In fact, this tension is exactly where your new research gap lives. When you see a contradiction, you need to pause and analyze it. Is it methodological, like maybe one study used a really broad survey while the other did a deep ethnographic dive? Is it contextual? Perhaps one was conducted pre-pandemic and one was post-pandemic. Maybe it's theoretical, relying on totally different frameworks, or statistical, using different analytical approaches. These contradictions aren't problems to be deleted or ignored. They are critical boundary conditions. They help specify exactly when and where particular findings actually apply. Section 4, the they say, I say. This brings us to the absolute core focus of today's explainer, a powerful formula for turning those contradictions into a dynamic, structured dialogue. This is where your synthesis really comes to life. I want you to think of your sources not as static documents printed on a page, but as brilliant researchers having a lively, intense dinner party debate. When you write your literature review, you are essentially acting as the host of this dinner party. It is your job to orchestrate the conversation. You need to make these experts talk directly to each other, and as the host, you are completely in control of highlighting the logical tension in the room. By putting them side by side, you engineer a direct conversation.
You write how researcher A claims fluoride reduces cavities by 25%. Then you immediately introduce researcher B, who basically interjects, actually, I found a 35% difference. And then researcher C argues that it's actually the brushing motion, not the fluoride at all. You see, you aren't just listing facts one after another. You're intentionally building logical tension between these scholars to expose exactly what we still don't know.
Now, to structure this in your actual paragraphs, you can't just drop quotes in a row and hope the reader figures it out. Your own voice must bookend the evidence to control the narrative. You always start with your claim, a trend you noticed. Then you bring in the evidence, that dinner party debate we just engineered. Finally, you end with your analysis and conclusion. It's your job to explicitly assess what all those differing viewpoints collectively mean for your specific field.
And that brings us to the ultimate formula for launching your research gap. The they say, I say. Step 1, you establish the they say, the current consensus in the field. Step 2, you introduce the tension. However, this body of work almost exclusively examines Fortune 500 companies, leaving nonprofits entirely unexamined. Step 3, you pivot right into the I say. This project will address that critical gap by looking at nonprofits. This deliberate sequence proves that your gap isn't just some random guess. It's a logical whole born from deep, deliberate synthesis.
Section 5. Automating your research tools. To build this complex architecture and manage all these talking heads effortlessly, you need the right digital infrastructure. So let's look at how modern tools can actually automate this process for you. If you're building massive synthesis matrices, you might want to work on a flight or in a dead zone, right? So it's really crucial to understand your software's capabilities here. Notion finally shipped in offline mode, but frankly, it has some limitations for researchers. Complex properties like databases, relations, and formulas, which are the exact things you need for a dynamic matrix, largely just don't work offline in Notion. Alternatively, offline-first tools like HintWord store everything locally by default, meaning your full Kanban boards and matrix tasks are going to work flawlessly without any preparation or internet connection at all.
However, when you are connected to the internet, recent updates to Notion make it an absolutely incredible operating system for your research. They've introduced page tabs, which perfectly fix that massive stack of papers problem by totally decluttering your workspace. They've added dashboards, which fixes the bird's eye view problem by allowing you to create filtered views across all your different research projects at once. They've even added a minimalist presentation mode and advanced headings for super clean Markdown exports. But let's talk about database automations, because this is where the real magic happens. This can literally save you hours of tedious administrative work. In Notion, you can set up an automation where the trigger is simply linking a new paper to your project database. The absolute second you make that relation, Notion can automatically generate a standardized checklist of tasks for you. Extract methodology, map to matrix, write they say summary. It is completely automated and entirely standardizes your workflow. It is a game changer. And for those of you with massive, unwieldy matrices that have grown over months or even years, you can now deploy background AI agents in Notion. You can actually set an agent to run on a schedule, say every single Friday night, to scan your entire synthesis matrix database, check for duplicate entries, and just keep everything perfectly organized without you lifting a single finger. This effectively puts your administrative overhead on autopilot, letting you focus entirely on the synthesis. So we've gone from the mindset of the architect to mapping the matrix to really leaning into that they say, I say formula to build logical tension, and finally looking at the tools that automate the whole shebang. You now know exactly how to map the academic conversation and pinpoint those empty cells. You literally have the blueprints. The only question left is, what will you build with the silence in the conversation? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and happy building.